Hi, I'm Janine Turner, founder of Constituting America. Welcome to our annual academic study entitled History Holds the Key to the Future, or as Shakespeare said, what's past is prologue. This year's study is entitled The Genius of America, A Journey into Our Republic, a study on Alexis De Tocqueville's Democracy in America. I think there is no period in which it is not necessary to attribute one part of the events of this world to very general facts and another to very particular influences. Alexis de Tocqueville. This essay is based off the readings Characteristics Peculiar to Historians in Democratic Ages, Volume 2, Part 1, Chapter 20, guest essayist Trevor Shelley. Starting on page 469. It's the Democracy in America version by the University of Chicago Press, first edition translated by Harvey, Mansfield, and Delba, Winthrop. Volume 2, Part 1, Chapter 20, on some tendencies particular to historians in democratic centuries, by Trevor Shelley. The second volume of Democracy in America is divided into 4 parts. The first of which is devoted to the, quote, influence of democracy on intellectual movement in the United States, end quote. De Tocqueville is here interested in understanding the ways democracy shapes and forms the minds, and so the mental activities of democratic peoples. In Chapter 20, he takes up the topics of historians, who are often intellectuals, and the writing of history, or historiography, an important exercise of the intellect, which influences how people perceive themselves and their times. There is no single or definitive account of the past, nor is the best method of historiography a settled matter. The way historians approach the facts of the past is itself affected by factors beyond the individual historian, including the social state and period in which they write. One of the most intellectually influential activities of the human mind is itself subject to influences outside the intellect. Thus, in this chapter, de Tocqueville discusses the kinds of causes in history and the different practices in writing history, while he likewise provides guidance to historians about intellectual eras of grave social and psychological consequence. The chapter is therefore both descriptive and evaluative of the tendencies of historians in aristocratic and in democratic ages. Aristocratic historians tend to focus on small or particular causes at the expense of great or general ones. They attribute tremendous importance to individuals, or to a, quote, a very few principal actors, end quote, who steer the course of history. They are enamored of great deeds and individual actions around which their narratives turn. This gives them, de Tocqueville writes, quote, an exaggerated idea of the influence that a man can exert, and naturally dispossesses them to believe that one must always go back to the particular action of an individual to explain the movements of the crowd, end quote. Aristocratic historiography, therefore, says little about the lives and opinions of the many, focusing almost exclusively on leaders, warriors, and other grand actors. It ignores the rest of society and other social facts. Consequently, the broader, quote, sequence of events eludes, end quote, these historians. De Tocqueville argues, by contrast, that democratic historians neglect or even deny the influence of individuals as they focus instead on things like, quote, the nature of races, the physical constitution of the country, or the spirit of the civilization, end quote. By obscuring particular persons and facts, democratic historians draw sweeping conclusions and, quote, make a system, end quote, or a methodical order, end quote, out of the general causes. Democratic historiography is therefore more self-conscious about method and system building. It tends to become less beautiful and more abstract. De Tocqueville's real concern, however, is, quote, when any trace of the action of individuals on nations is lost, it often happens that one sees the world moving without discovering its motor, end quote. This tempts people to believe there are large, inevitable, and irresistible forces at work in history against which the human will is powerless. While the tendencies of both types are prone to exaggerations and pitfalls, the assumption of democratic historians that all are subject, quote, either to an inflexible providence or to a sort of blind fatality, end quote, is for de Tocqueville a dangerous view. An idea that, quote, does not save human freedom, end quote. For the, quote, doctrine of fatality, end quote, adopted by Democrat historians, does not remain confined to schools of history or to the world of historians, but eventually, quote, penetrates the entire mass of citizens, end quote, and shapes, quote, the public mind, end quote. The fatalism of historians leads individuals to doubt free will itself. In opposition to this doctrine, de Tocqueville writes, quote, it is a question of elevating souls and not completing their prostration, end quote. People are ennobled by a sense of the soul's capacity for judgment and action, and historiography ought to reflect, or better yet encourage, this fact so that citizens cultivate an appreciation for freedom, which is both a prerequisite for and an effect of self-government. Readers will wonder whether de Tocqueville is himself more of an aristocratic or democratic historian. Near the chapter's midpoint, he writes, quote, I think that there is no period in which it is not necessary to attribute one part of the events of this world to very general facts and another to very particular influences. These two causes are always met with, only their relationship differs, end quote. While democracy in America makes so much of the general or mother cause of equality of conditions, de Tocqueville's comparative approach helps him avoid succumbing to the spirit of either age or to the tendencies toward excess of either historiographical approach. The very fact that he speaks of, quote, tendencies, end quote, indicates that the minds of historians, as with all individuals, are always free in important respects. Strong doubt, to the contrary, results from a corrupting that demands spirited resistance. The chapter here under discussion is valuable for thinking about history and historiography, but also for evaluating de Tocqueville's own project, as well as the writings of others in our democratic age, to measure and assess the ways different works may contribute either to the elevation or the prostration of souls. This essay was written by Trevor Shelley. Trevor Shelley is Assistant Teaching Professor and Associate Director of Graduate Studies at the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. He is author of Liberalism and Globalization, Montesquieu, Tocqueville, and Manet, Notre Dame 2020. Co-editor of Citizenship and Civic Leadership in America, Lexington 2022, and of Renewing America's Civic Compact, Lexington 2023, and author of various book chapters and articles on political theory.